The flashbulbs of the paparazzi were a relentless, blinding strobe, turning the grand staircase of the Metropolitan Museum of Art into a stage. At the center, Damian Blackwood, a titan of industry, smirked as his mistress, Irene Vance, clung to his arm. Draped in a scandalous crimson Schiaparelli gown, Irene smiled proudly, her gaze sweeping over the reporters from Vogue and Page 6. This was her coronation. She had won. She was the woman on the arm of the most powerful man in New York. Then a new sound, a ripple of gasps from the entryway. The cameras as one pivoted. The wall of light swung away from Irene, leaving her in the sudden, cold darkness of irrelevance. Her smile froze. Damian's head snapped toward the door. The reporters were clamoring, shouting a new name. His wife's name. The Night of Legends Gala was the apex of the New York social season, a billion-dollar constellation of old money, new tech, and blinding influence. And in this universe, Damian Blackwood was the sun. He moved through the crowd with the gravitational pull of a man who owned entire city blocks, his bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo fitting him like a second skin. On his arm, Irene Vance was his chosen accessory, a physical manifestation of his impunity. She was everything his wife was not. Young, loud, breathtakingly beautiful, and utterly uncomplicated. Tonight she wore a dress that seemed painted on crimson silk, cut so low it defied physics, her throat encircled by a diamond necklace Damian had casually gifted her last week. It was, she knew, a necklace that had once been promised to his wife. "They adore you, Damian," she whispered, her voice a purr, as she tilted her chin for the cameras. She wasn't wrong. The press loved their scandal. It was so brazen. For 6 months, Damian hadn't just conducted an affair. He had flaunted it, taking Irene to the restaurants, the premieres, and the auctions that were once the exclusive domain of his wife. Eva Rousseau Blackwood. The name was a whisper, a relic. She was the ice queen of the Upper East Side. A woman from a lineage so old and revered, it made Damian's tech billions seem gauche. She was poise, restraint, and everyone assumed humiliation. For 6 months, Eva had been invisible. She had not been seen, had not issued a statement, had not filed for divorce. She had simply vanished. The society pages had a field day, painting her as a tragic, broken recluse hiding in their massive Fifth Avenue penthouse, listening to the floorboards creak as her husband packed for his next business trip to St. Bart's with his mistress. Damian, for his part, had come to believe this narrative. He had married Eva for her name, her connections, and her family's vast, quiet influence. He had used that influence to build his empire, Blackwood Holdings. And now that he was on top, he found her silent dignity boring. He preferred Irene, who was as shiny and hollow as a Christmas ornament. "Let them look," Damian murmured back to Irene, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. "Tonight we're showing them what the new power in this city looks like." Irene beamed. This was it. This gala was her official debut. Eva's absence was the final concession. By not showing up, she was admitting defeat. Irene was the de facto Mrs. Blackwood now. She looked past the cameras, spotting the gatekeepers of their world. Blythe Danner, a formidable old-money matriarch, watched them with undisguised contempt. Irene didn't care. Contempt from the old guard was just jealousy in a Chanel suit. A reporter from Vanity Fair pushed a microphone forward. "Mr. Blackwood, Irene. You two are the talk of the town. Is this an official statement?" Damien chuckled a low, arrogant sound. The only statement I'm making is that Blackwood Holdings just had its best quarter in history, and I always celebrate with the best. He squeezed Irene's hand. She felt a thrill shoot through her. He was claiming her, in front of everyone. She leaned into the microphone, her smile wide and proud. I just think that in life you have to go after what you want. You can't be afraid. And Damien isn't afraid of anything. The crowd of reporters cooed, scribbling furiously. Irene felt like a queen. She could already see the headlines: "The New Power Couple," "Blackwood's Bold New Era." She looked at Damien, her heart swelling with a triumphant, vicious pride. He was hers. She had taken him from the most envied woman in New York. She smiled again for the cameras, a slow, deliberate turning of her head. This was her moment, her victory etched in the flash of 1,000 cameras. She felt untouchable. It was in that precise second of her absolute triumph that the world tilted. It wasn't a loud noise. It was a change in the air, a sudden collective intake of breath from the press pool clustered at the bottom of the grand staircase. Then the sound of a dozen heads turning as one. "What is it?" Irene asked, her smile faltering. The nearest photographer lowered his camera, his eyes wide, looking past her. "My God," he whispered. The lights. The lights were moving. The blinding, adoring strobes that had been fixed on her and Damien were suddenly shifting, swinging away like a bank of searchlights, creating a new, brilliant focal point at the main entrance. Damien let go of her hand. "What the hell?" he growled. Irene was left in the penumbra, the sudden absence of the camera flashes making the grand hall feel cold. Her proud smile was a frozen, confused grimace. She and Damien, who had been the blazing center of the universe, were now just two people standing on a staircase, watching the show with everyone else. And the show had just begun. The silence that fell was heavy and absolute, a vacuum waiting to be filled. The only sounds were the distant strains of the string quartet and the frantic, hushed whispers of the press. "Is that? It can't be. Who is she with?" Then she stepped into the light. It was Eva Rousseau Blackwood. But it was not the Eva the world remembered. This was not the broken, mousy recluse from the Page 6 caricatures. This was not a woman in victim's mourning black. Eva was wearing a custom column gown by Oscar de la Renta, the color of a midnight sky, a deep, celestial sapphire that seemed to drink the light. It was elegant, severe, and breathtaking. But it wasn't the dress that made the room gasp. It was the jewels. Around her throat, she wore the legendary Blackwood emeralds. It was a necklace of staggering historical importance, a cascade of deep green stones that had belonged to Damien's grandmother, rumored to be worth over $50 million. It was the one piece Irene had begged for, the one piece Damien had denied her, saying it was locked in the family vault. And here it was blazing on his wife's collarbones, a defiant, glittering statement. Her dark hair was swept back in a severe, elegant chignon, and her makeup was minimal, save for a bold crimson lip, a slash of color that matched the dress on the woman her husband had brought. It was a subtle, calculated cruelty. Eva paused at the top of the stairs, her expression unreadable. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't sadness. It was a serene, terrifying calm. She surveyed the room, her gaze sweeping over the stunned socialites, the frantic reporters, and landing for just one cold, brief second on Damien and Irene. She held their stare, and then she smiled, a small, polite, devastatingly indifferent smile. And then the room exploded. The cameras went off in a frenzy that dwarfed the reception Damien had received. This was the story. Not the predictable affair, but the possible resurrection. Eva, Mrs. Blackwood. Eva, who are you wearing? Where have you been? But the biggest shock, the twist that sent the reporters into a feeding frenzy, was the man on her arm. He was not a bodyguard. He was not a relative. He was Julian Hayes. If Damien Blackwood was the king of New York finance, Julian Hayes was the brilliant, charismatic disruptor from Silicon Valley. He was Damien's equal in wealth, but his superior in reputation. He was the tech visionary who Damien had famously and ruthlessly crushed in a hostile takeover of a clean energy company, Aperture, 5 years prior. The battle had been brutal, personal, and had cemented Damien's reputation as a shark. Hayes had since rebuilt his fortune, but he and Damien were mortal enemies. And he was here at the Met with Damien's wife on his arm, looking at her with an expression of open, protective admiration. "Eva, what does this mean?" a reporter from the New York Times shouted, recognizing the tectonic shift in power this image represented. "Are you and Mr. Hayes a new item?" "Mrs. Blackwood, is this a statement on your marriage?" Eva glided down the stairs. Julian's hand resting lightly on her back. She didn't rush. She let them all watch. She stopped near the bottom, just a few feet from where Damien and Irene stood frozen. She raised a hand, and the room quieted, slightly desperate to hear her voice. She leaned toward the New York Times reporter, her voice clear and cool, carrying in the sudden hush. "Good evening, Sarah. It's lovely to see you." Her voice was smooth, cultured, betraying no emotion. "Mr. Hayes is a very old friend. I am simply here tonight as a patron of the museum, to support the arts." "But your husband," another reporter stammered, pointing up at Damien. Eva's gaze followed. She looked up at Damien, as if noticing him for the first time. "Oh," she said, her voice light, almost amused. "Damien is here. How nice." She then turned her back on him completely. "Julian," she said, her voice warming as she addressed her escort. "I believe our table is this way. I'm so looking forward to seeing the new exhibit." As she and Julian Hayes began to walk into the main hall, the entire press corps moved with them, abandoning Damien and Irene on the stairs as if they were yesterday's news. The sea of cameras a moment ago, their adoring audience now presented them with a wall of backs. Damien Blackwood, for the first time in his public life, was irrelevant. And he was absolutely seething. Irene's world, which had been so bright and sharp, had just dissolved into a blurry, cold fog. The silence where the cameras had been was deafening. She could feel the stares of the few people left on the staircase, the waiters, the security. A stray guest, and it burned her skin. Their pity was worse than their envy. Her smile, the proud, triumphant smile, was still plastered on her face, but it was a grotesque mask. It was the smile of a skull. Her muscles were locked, and she was afraid if she tried to move her face it would crack into 1,000 pieces. She turned to Damien. He was the most powerful man she knew. He could fix this. He could yell. He could call someone. He could make the reporters come back. "Damien," she whispered, her voice tight. "Do something. They're walking away." Damien didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on the back of Eva's sapphire dress as it disappeared into the crowd. His face, usually so commanding and charismatic, was a terrifying mask of white-hot fury. His knuckles were white where he gripped the stair railing. He wasn't breathing. He was vibrating. Damien, she tried again, tugging on his arm. He ripped his arm out of her grasp. The movement was so violent, it sent her stumbling back a step. Don't touch me, he hissed. Irene flinched as if struck. The coldness in his voice was a physical blow. This wasn't the script. He was supposed to be angry for her, angry that his wife had dared to show up and spoil their night. But as she looked at his face, a horrifying realization dawned. He wasn't angry for her. He was angry at her. He was angry that she was standing next to him. In that moment, she was not his prize. She was his liability. She was the scarlet-dressed, tacky, obvious mistake that had pushed his wife into the arms of his greatest enemy. What is he doing here with her? Damien finally spat his voice, low and dangerous, directed at the floor. She wouldn't dare. Not Julian Hayes. Not my wife. The possessiveness in his voice, my wife, was another knife in Irene's heart. He had never used that tone with her. She tried to recover to regain her footing as the woman he desired. She looks old, Irene offered a pathetic, catty attempt. And that dress is so boring. Damien finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were dead. She's wearing the Blackwood emeralds, and you... He sneered, his gaze raking over her pensive revealing dress. Look like a cheap party favor. Irene stopped breathing. The insult was so sudden, so brutal, it knocked the air from her lungs. This was the man who just this morning had told her she was a goddess. This was the man who had begged her to wear this very dress. The world was spinning. She could hear the whispers starting up from the mezzanine. The old money matriarchs who had been watching from their balconies were now fanning themselves and leaning into each other. Did you see? Julian Hayes. Of all people, in the crimson dress, looks like she got her invitation from a cereal box. Served him cold, on a silver platter, rightfully so. Irene felt a wave of nausea. She was the joke. She wasn't the new queen. She was the court jester, and the play was over. She had mistaken the spotlight for the sun, and now she was burning. Damien, meanwhile, was already in damage control mode, but it was the damage control of a wounded animal. He shoved past her, storming down the stairs, pushing a waiter aside. "Get me my car," he barked at a security guard. "Sir, the gala has just started. Get me my car, now." He was leaving. He was leaving her. "Damien!" She cried out. Her voice, cracking all pretense of pride, gone. She hurried after him, her heels catching on the steps. "Damien! Wait! Where are you going?" He didn't stop. He was halfway across the lobby. She ran a desperate, undignified scramble, grabbing his elbow. "You can't leave me here!" He stopped and turned to her, his face so contorted with rage that she almost didn't recognize him. He leaned in close, his voice a venomous whisper. "This is your fault. You and your incessant need for attention. You pushed this. You wanted to be public. Well, congratulations, Irene. You're public. You're the stupidest, most obvious cliché in the room. But she's the one who... Damien interrupted, "is my wife, and she just declared war. And you're just collateral damage. Go home. You're done." He yanked his arm free and stalked out the front doors, leaving Irene Vance alone in the grand lobby of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The crimson dress that had felt so powerful an hour ago now felt like a target. The diamond necklace felt like a collar. She stood there shaking as the security guard looked away, embarrassed for her. The proud smile was long gone, replaced by the pale, slack-jawed shock of a person who had just lost everything and hadn't even known she was in a fight. To understand the perfection of that night, one had to understand that Eva Rousseau Blackwood had not been hiding for 6 months. She had been working. The woman the world saw as an ice queen was in fact a fortress, and for the last half-year, that fortress had been preparing for war. The story began not with Irene, but with a ledger. Eva, a Vassar graduate with a degree in art history and economics, was not a silent partner in her family's foundation. She ran it. Her family, the Rousseaus, had built their fortune in shipping and land, and their philanthropic foundation was a century-old institution. 8 months ago, she had noticed a discrepancy. A very large, very complex transfer of funds from the foundation's endowment to an offshore shell corporation she had never heard of. It was sophisticated, buried deep in derivatives and fake invoices, but it was there. And it was thievery. Her first call was not to Damien. It was to Mr. Wall, Abernathy, her father's lawyer, a man in his 70s with a mind like a steel trap, whom Damien had arrogantly dismissed as a fossil years ago. For 2 weeks they worked in the library of Eva's childhood home in Greenwich, tracing the money. The trail led unequivocally to Damien. He had been systematically siphoning funds from her family's legacy to cover massive, high-risk losses in a new crypto venture. He was building a venture. He was hiding from his own board at Blackwood Holdings. He wasn't just cheating. He was stealing from her. The betrayal was biblical. It wasn't his body she cared about. It was his soul. He had taken her trust, her name, and her family's honor, and set it all on fire to fuel his own ego. That same week, the first photos of Damien with Irene Vance appeared on page 6. Eva looked at the grainy picture of her husband kissing a C-list model on a yacht. A year ago, it might have shattered her. Now it was simply a tool. "He's getting sloppy," she told Abernathy, sliding the newspaper across the polished mahogany desk. "His ego is making him reckless. He wants to be seen with her. He thinks it makes him look powerful. He thinks I'm too weak to do anything about it." Abernathy adjusted his spectacles. "What do you want to do, Eva?" "Most women would file for divorce," Eva said, her voice quiet, "and he would drag me through the mud. He'd hide the assets, claim I was unstable. He'd use his PR machine to paint me as the cold, frigid wife he had to escape. And in the divorce, he'd get half of everything, including what's left of my family's money, which he would then use to pay off the debts he incurred by stealing from me." "So what is the alternative?" Eva stood and walked to the window, looking out over the gardens. "The alternative is that he gets nothing. He loses everything." Her plan was a masterpiece of cold, strategic patience. First, she let the affair flourish. She vanished, as the papers said, encouraging the narrative of the broken wife. She knew Damien. His arrogance was his Achilles' heel. The more she faded, the louder he and Irene would become. The louder they became, the more overconfident he would be, and the more mistakes he would make. While the world thought she was weeping, she was moving. She quietly, legally, and meticulously separated her family's assets from his. She created a firewall, pulling all her personal holdings and the foundation's core capital out of any institution connected to Blackwood Holdings. Then she hired a team of the best forensic accountants in the world. They worked out of a rented, unmarked office in Midtown, and they tore Damien's empire apart, piece by piece. They found it all: the wire fraud, the money laundering, the illegal leveraging of Blackwood Holdings stock to secure personal loans he was funneling to Irene. He had bought Irene's new condo in Soho, not with his money, but with stolen funds from the Rousseau Foundation. For months, Eva lived a double life. By day, she was the invisible recluse. By night, she was the general of an army mapping out her husband's complete financial and social annihilation. The final piece of the puzzle was Julian Hayes. She contacted him 4 weeks ago under a pseudonym. They met at a private lounge at the Carlisle. Julian was wary, his hatred for Damien still simmering after 5 years. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, his voice polite but guarded. "This is, unexpected. If you're here to ask me to back off your husband, you're wasting your time." Eva handed him a single leather-bound folio. "I'm here to give you your company back, Mr. Hayes, and to offer you Damien's." For an hour, Julian read. His expression shifted from skepticism to shock, and finally to a slow, cold fury. The documents proved that Damien had used illegal insider information and laundered funds to execute the hostile takeover of Aperture. "He didn't just buy me out," Julian said, his voice dangerously soft. "He committed federal crimes." "Yes," Eva said. "He did. And he's been doing it ever since. He's a house of cards, Julian. He's leveraged to the hilt. All he has is his reputation and the perception of his success. If that perception cracks, the whole thing collapses." "What do you want from me?" Julian asked. "I have already submitted this entire file anonymously to the SEC and the Southern District of New York. They are building their case. It's only a matter of time," Eva explained. "But I don't just want him in jail. I want him exposed. I want the world he loves so much to see him for the fraud he is." She paused, then looked him directly in the eyes. "The night of Legends Gala is in 2 weeks. He's taking his mistress. It's her coronation. The press will be there in full force. He's planning to use the publicity to announce a new acquisition." A slow smile spread across Julian's face. He understood. He's banking on his own celebrity to distract from his financials. "Exactly," Eva said. "So, we'll give them a different story. You and I will arrive together. We will not be lovers. We will be partners. Your presence signals to Wall Street that his greatest rival is aligned with me. It signals a shift in the power dynamic. It will be the first crack in the dam." "And the SEC?" Julian asked. "I've timed it," Eva said, taking a sip of her water. "My lawyers are filing my divorce papers precisely at 8:00 p.m. on the night of the gala, citing irreconcilable differences and fraudulent conveyance. The SEC's public notice of investigation triggered by my whistleblower complaint is scheduled to hit the wire at 8:15 p.m. Julian stared at her, a newfound profound respect in his eyes. She wasn't a victim. She was a tactician. "He'll be on the red carpet when it happens," Julian breathed. "He'll be trapped, publicly." "Yes," Eva said. "He wants to be the center of attention. I'll make him the center of the biggest implosion this city has ever seen. Are you in, Mr. Hayes?" Julian Hayes raised his glass. "Eva, I'm all in." Back at the gala, the atmosphere had curdled. The air, once champagne light, was now thick with tension. Eva and Julian Hayes were seated at the museum's most prominent table, Table 1, which was, by tradition, reserved for the event's highest donors. It was the table Damien had demanded and been refused. Eva was the new sun. Socialites, CEOs, and even politicians who had once golfed with Damien were now making a slow, deliberate pilgrimage to her table to offer their respects. They kissed her cheek, shook Julian's hand, and threw subtle, disdainful glances back toward the entrance, where Damien was now standing alone, having reappeared after his tantrum. He was a man on an island. He had tried to corner a board member, But the man had clapped him on the shoulder, muttered something about a bad look, and hurried away. Damien was a predator, and he was cornered. He did the only thing he knew how he attacked. He stalked across the marble floor, weaving through the tables, his sights set on Eva. The few remaining reporters watched, cameras raised. This was the confrontation. Eva. His voice was low, cutting through the din. She was in conversation with a senator. She finished her sentence, smiled warmly at the politician, and only then turned her head slowly to her husband. Damien, you decided to stay. How professional of you. What is this? He demanded, his voice a low growl. What are you doing? What is he doing here? He jabbed a finger toward Julian. Julian Hayes, who had been listening, rose slowly from his chair. He was taller than Damien, and where Damien was coiled, rage. Julian was relaxed, solid power. Hello, Damien, Julian said, his voice pleasant. It's been a long time. You're looking stressed. Is everything all right at the office? The casual, patronizing question sent a bolt of rage through Damien. You stay out of this, Hayes. This is between me and my wife. I'm afraid you're mistaken, Damien, Eva said, her voice still perfectly calm. She didn't even bother to stand. She simply looked up at him. This is no longer between us. This is a matter of public record. Or at least, she paused, glancing at her Cartier watch. It will be in about 3 minutes. Damien's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? What public record? And just as he spoke, a new sound filled the room. It was not a gasp this time. It was the electronic, multi-toned chime of 100 phones receiving a priority notification at the exact same moment. A symphony of buzzes and alerts. Every guest in the room, every banker, every reporter, every socialite looked down at their phone. A man at a nearby table gasped, "Oh my God!" Sarah Jensen, the New York Times reporter, was standing nearby. Her head snapped up from her phone, her face pale with professional shock. "Mr. Blackwood," she called out, her voice sharp, all pretense of gala etiquette gone. "Is it true that the SEC has just announced a formal investigation into Blackwood Holdings for securities fraud and money laundering?" Damien's blood ran cold. He visibly recoiled. "What? That's a lie. That's ridiculous." "Mr. Blackwood," another reporter shouted, "we're also receiving a wire notification that Eva Blackwood filed for divorce 1 minute ago, citing gross financial misconduct and fraudulent conveyance of assets." The room was spinning. Damien stared dumbfounded at Eva. She hadn't moved. She just watched him, her expression one of mild clinical observation. "You," he whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical force. You did this." "I did what, Damien?" she asked, her voice clear for everyone at the surrounding tables to hear. "Did I force you to steal from my family's foundation? Did I force you to commit wire fraud? Did I force you to leverage the company to its breaking point to buy trinkets for your mistress?" Each word was a perfectly placed stiletto heel on his throat. You. He was sputtering, the master of the universe, rendered speechless. And then, in a moment of pure, pathetic desperation, Irene Vance reappeared. She had been lurking by the entrance, her face blotchy from crying, having been unable to get a car. She saw the commotion, saw Damien confronting his wife, and saw her last, desperate chance to reinsert herself. She ran over, grabbing Damien's arm. "Damien, darling, let's just go. These people are horrible. She's a monster." Damien shook her off, but Irene clung to him, looking at Eva with a face full of spite. You're a bitter, dried-up old witch. You couldn't keep him, so you decided to ruin him. He loves me." The room fell into a mortified silence. It was a tacky, desperate, and deeply embarrassing display. Eva looked at Irene. She didn't scold her. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at her from her over-dyed blonde hair to her crimson dress with a look of profound, devastating pity. "My dear girl," Eva said, her voice soft and lethal, "he doesn't love you. He used you. He used you as a distraction while he was robbing my family. And the condo he bought you, the car. That necklace," Eva paused, letting the silence stretch. "They were purchased with stolen money. My money. Which means my lawyers will be seizing them as assets in the morning. I'd advise you to pack." Irene's face collapsed. The color drained from it entirely. "As for you, Damien," Eva continued, turning back to her husband. He was staring at her, his empire crumbling in his mind. "You mistook my kindness for weakness. You mistook my silence for submission. You thought I was a painting, something pretty, to hang on your wall while you did your dirty business in the dark. You forgot I am a Rousseau. My family built this city. And you are just a vandal. And we always clean up our messes." Julian Hayes finally stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Eva's shoulder. He looked at Damien. "I believe your car is outside Blackwood. I'd suggest you take it. You're going to have a very busy morning with your lawyers." Damien looked from Eva's cold, resolute face to Julian's triumphant one. He was finished, and he knew it. Without another word, he turned, shoved his way through the stunned crowd, and fled the gala. Irene Vance was left standing alone in the middle of the floor, the target of 100 staring eyes. She let out a small, choking sob, then turned and ran out the door after him, a crimson streak of public humiliation. Eva Blackwood took a sip of her champagne. The quartet began to play again. The fallout was not a slow burn, it was a detonation. By 9:00 p.m., Blackwood implosion was the #1 trending topic worldwide. By 10:00 p.m., the stock for Blackwood Holdings, traded on the Tokyo Exchange, had been halted after plunging 82% in after-hours trading. Damien Blackwood did not go home. He went to his office. He found the doors locked. His keycard, a biometric scanner that read, his palm beeped red. Access denied. He smashed his fist against it. "Open this door. Open this damn door." A night security guard, a man Damien had never bothered to learn the name of, approached him nervously. "Sir, I'm sorry. We received an email. The board has called an emergency session. You've been suspended pending the investigation. I'm supposed to escort you from the premises." "I am the board," Damien roared, his voice echoing in the empty marble lobby. "Not anymore, sir." He was escorted out of his own building, a sputtering, powerless man, shielding his face from the single, determined Page 6 photographer who had followed him from the gala. The picture that ran on the front page the next morning was not of a titan, but of a coward. Irene's fate was swifter, and in some ways more brutal. She arrived back at the Soho condo Damien had bought her mind racing. "Pack," she said, "pack. She's bluffing. She can't just take it." She was wrong. At 8:00 a.m. her doorman buzzed. It wasn't Damien. It was two polite, impassive men in suits and a woman with a clipboard. They were from the bank, accompanied by a receiver appointed by the court. "Miss Vance." We have a court order to seize this property and all contents purchased with funds traceable to Mr. Damien Blackwood's fraudulent accounts. You have 1 hour to collect your personal effects." "You can't do this," she shrieked. The woman with the clipboard just looked at her. "Ma'am, the order is signed. The closet, the jewelry, the car. It's all on the list." An hour later, Irene Vance was standing on the sidewalk on Spring Street with 2 suitcases wearing a tracksuit. The crimson Schiaparelli dress was in a heap on the floor inside. The diamond necklace had been taken from her hands. She tried to call Damien. The call went straight to a disconnected message. He had already changed his number. She who had smiled so proudly just 12 hours before sat down on her suitcase and wept a nobody invisible to the fashionable crowd walking by. The legal battle was bloody but short. The evidence Eva had compiled was airtight. Damien's high-priced lawyers, seeing the mountain of evidence and the fact that their client's funds were frozen, advised him to plead guilty to a lesser charge. Damien, in his hubris, refused. He tried to fight. He tried to claim Eva was an unstable, vindictive wife. But Eva never had to say another word. The forensic accountants and the U.S. attorney for the Southern District did the talking for her. They painted a picture of a man so consumed by greed and ego that he had risked his entire company, his investors and his wife's family legacy, all for a few more dollars and a younger girlfriend. He was found guilty on 6 counts of wire fraud and securities fraud. The judge, a woman who had known Eva's father, made an example of him. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The old guard, the ones who had whispered about Irene, were silent. They had watched a member of their own class execute a rival with surgical precision. It was a display of power they understood and respected. Eva Rousseau had restored order. The 90 days that followed the Night of Legends Gala were not a time of celebration for Eva Rousseau. They were a time of war. The gala had been the opening salvo, the public declaration, but the true battle was fought in the sterile, fluorescent-lit arenas of bankruptcy courts, federal offices, and law firm conference rooms. The press was a relentless, ravenous beast. They camped outside her Fifth Avenue penthouse, the penthouse she had not returned to, and outside her family's Greenwich estate. They followed Mr. Abernathy from his car to his office. They offered 6-figure sums for a single, exclusive quote. Eva gave them nothing. She issued one and only one statement via her legal team. Ms. Rousseau is fully cooperating with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the SEC in their investigation. Her focus is on ensuring the stability of the Rousseau Foundation and seeking justice for those defrauded. She will be making no further comment. This silent, dignified front drove the media into a frenzy. In the absence of her voice, they amplified the voices of those who were collapsing. They ran the grainy cell phone video of Irene Vance weeping on a Soho sidewalk, her 2 suitcases beside her. They published the tabloid exclusive she sold for a pittance, a rambling, incoherent story that painted her as a tragic heroine which only succeeded in making her look pathetic. They ran the perp walk photo of Damien Blackwood, his hands cuffed, his face a mask of purple sputtering rage as he was led from his lawyer's office. But while the world consumed the melodrama, Eva was working. She had set up a war room, not in a corporate high-rise, but in the mahogany-paneled library of her father's Greenwich home. It was from here, surrounded by books on economic theory and art history, that she and Julian Hayes staged their corporate coup. Blackwood Holdings was in freefall. With its CEO indicted and its assets frozen, the company was hemorrhaging investors, clients, and talent. The acting board, a collection of Damien's yes-men, was in a state of terminal panic. "We let it burn," Julian said one night staring at a spreadsheet that showed a catastrophic 90% loss in value. It was 3:00 a.m. They were both running on coffee and cold fury. We let it collapse, buy the assets for pennies on the dollar, and fold Aperture into the shell. It's the smart play. His name will be rubble. Eva, who was marking up a dense legal document, did not look up. No. No, Eva, it's a corpse. We'd be buying debt and a toxic reputation. There are 7,000 employees, Julian, she said finally, raising her eyes. They were tired but sharp as steel. Secretaries, analysts, engineers, janitors. They did nothing wrong. They just came to work. He built this company on my family's foundation, and he built it with their labor. I will not let his failure be their ruin. It's not his company anymore. The foundation is rotten, but the building is sound. Julian studied her for a long moment. The press was painting this as a romance, a fiery, vengeful affair. They were so wrong. This was something far more potent. It was a meeting of minds, a partnership of pure distilled respect. Then we don't buy the rubble, he said, a slow smile spreading. We become the lifeline, a joint acquisition, your capital, my tech. We don't just buy it, we save it. We restructure it, she corrected, turning back to her document. We cleanse it. So began the real work. They worked 20-hour days. They navigated the labyrinth of bankruptcy law, fending off vulture capitalists who smelled blood. Eva's name, the Rousseau name, proved to be her greatest asset. Where Blackwood now meant fraud and Risk Rousseau meant stability, old money, and integrity. She personally called the banks her calm, authoritative voice, securing lines of credit that had been denied just days before. Julian, meanwhile, tore into the company's infrastructure. He found that Damien's rot was contained mostly to the executive and finance levels. The tech and logistics divisions were solid, staffed by brilliant people who had been stifled by Damien's ego-driven projects. The press, of course, saw none of this nuance. Page 6 ran a speculative column, headlined From Ice Queen to Tech Titan's Treasure, Eva and Julian hotter than a hostile takeover. Julian tossed the paper onto the library table. Eva was on a call with a Swiss banker and didn't even flinch. She simply held up a finger, finished her conversation in flawless French, and hung up. They're calling us Java, Julian said, amused. Eva finally looked at the headline and gave a small, dry sigh. Let them talk. It keeps them distracted from the asset redistribution plan we're filing tomorrow. They're looking for a romance novel. We're executing a corporate restructure. They're so busy watching the wrong door, they won't even notice we've taken the house. The acquisition was finalized on a cold grey Tuesday, 87 days after the gala. The entity Blackwood Holdings was officially dissolved. In its place, a new private company was born, Rousseau Hayes Global. Eva's first act as chairwoman was to walk into the penthouse she had once shared with Damien. It was exactly as he'd left it, a monument to his taste, dark leather chrome and oversized garish modern art. It reeked of his cologne. She walked through the silent rooms, her footsteps echoing. She stood in his massive walk-in closet at the empty space where the Blackwood emeralds had once been kept. She was now, by court order, the sole owner of the entire Blackwood estate, including the jewels. She had won it all. She turned to Mr. Abernathy, who had accompanied her. "Sell the jewels," she said, her voice quiet. Abernathy blinked. "Eva, the Blackwood emeralds they are priceless, a family heirloom. They were his family's heirloom, Mr. Abernathy, and their value is obscene. Sell them, privately, and every single cent is to be the first deposit into the new Rousseau Foundation Community Fund. The money he stole will be the seed that rebuilds what he tried to destroy. She then walked to the living room, looked at the billion-dollar view, and called her personal assistant. "Get a design firm in here. I want it stripped to the concrete and the glass. I want every trace of him gone. This was his tomb. I'm going to make it my office." Her second act was to go to the 50th floor of the newly christened Rousseau Hayes Tower. The executive board, those few who hadn't been indicted, were gathered sweating in the main conference room. They had been Damien's enablers' men who had gotten rich by looking the other way. They rose as she entered, their smiles ingratiating and false. "Eva Mrs. Blackwood? Miss Rousseau? A terrible, terrible business. We had no idea." One of them, a man named Peterson, began. Eva walked to the head of the table. She did not sit. She placed her leather folio down. "You didn't have an idea, Mr. Peterson, because you were paid a 7-figure salary not to. You didn't have an idea because you were too busy approving fraudulent expense reports for apartments in Soho and trips to St. Bart's. You mistook complicity for loyalty." She opened the folio. "Your severance packages are being messengered to your homes. They are by the letter of your contracts, exactly what you are owed, which is nothing. Your termination is for cause. Security will escort you from the building. Now." They sputtered. They threatened lawsuits. Eva just watched them, her expression as calm and cold as the grave, until security arrived and removed them one by one. Her third act took place an hour later. She sent a summons for a mid-level risk analyst named Sarah Hayes. The young woman entered the massive office terrified. "Ms. Rousseau, you wanted to see me, Ms. Hayes," Eva said, motioning for her to sit. "I've spent the last month reading every internal audit from the last 5 years. Yours were the only ones that were accurate. You were tracking the offshore shell corporations long before I was. You flagged them, and you were ignored." Sarah paled. I was told by Mr. Peterson to stop." "I know," Eva said. "You've been running the real numbers for this company for 3 years, haven't you? While the men upstairs played make-believe." Yes. I suppose I have. How would you like the title and the salary to match the work?" Eva asked, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time. "I'm making you Chief Financial Officer of Rousseau Hayes Global, if you'll have it." Sarah Hayes stared speechless as Eva Rousseau, the woman the world thought was a fragile, broken ice queen, offered her a hand. Sarah took it, and the new era truly began. Today was the new dawn crystallized. 3 months to the day after the gala. The snow was falling softly outside, blanketing Central Park, in a clean, quiet white. The new boardroom was unrecognizable. The dark, oppressive mahogany was gone, replaced with light maple and glass. The walls were covered not with Damien's abstract art, but with architectural renderings of Aperture's clean energy projects. The faces around the table were new. Sarah Hayes sat at the head reports in front of her. Julian was to Eva's right. The rest were a mix of new hires, sharp and hungry, and long overlooked internal talent. The atmosphere wasn't fear. It was a humming, focused anticipation. Eva stood at the head of the table. She wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress. No jewels, save for her father's simple gold watch. "Good morning, everyone," she said. Her voice, as always, was clear and calm. "Welcome. For the past decade, this company was run as a monument to one man's ego. It was opaque, it was reckless, and it was, as we all know, fundamentally corrupt. That era is over, as of today." She nodded to Sarah, who, with a keystroke, projected the new company charter onto the wall. Our new mission is twofold, Eva continued. First, we will be a leader in sustainable technology and ethical finance, merging the best of Aperture with the legacy of this firm. Second, we will be transparent to our investors, to our employees, and to the public. We will not be the loudest company in New York. We will not be the flashiest. We will be the most trusted. We will build things that last. She paused, looking out the window for a moment at the city spread below her. She had not sought revenge. She had sought justice. She had not wanted to destroy a man. She had wanted to save a legacy. She had been the silent, supportive wife for a decade. She had been the ice queen, the object of pity. They had all underestimated her. They mistook her patience for passivity, her silence for weakness. They had forgotten that ice is not weak. It is powerful. It is relentless. It builds over time, silently, until it is strong enough to break stone. She turned back to her new board. A genuine, satisfied smile touched her lips. "The first item on the agenda," she said, nodding to Julian, who unrolled a large blueprint. "The Rousseau Foundation Community Reinvestment Fund, using the proceeds from liquidated assets. We are breaking ground on 3 new community centers and a vocational school in the boroughs. Our first quarterly report will not be about profit. It will be about impact." She looked at each of them. "We are going to make our legacy not about wealth, but about worth." She closed her folio. "Now let's get to work." That right there is a story about the danger of underestimating the person standing quietly in the corner. It's a reminder that true power isn't loud. It doesn't need a crimson dress or a wall of cameras. True power is strategic. It's patient, and it's lethal when it's finally unleashed. Damien and Irene were so focused on the spotlight, they never saw the woman writing the script in the shadows. Eva didn't just win the battle. She had planned the entire war down to the last second. She wasn't the victim. She was the architect. What did you think of Eva's plan? Was it cold-blooded, or was it perfect justice? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I read every single one. And if you love stories where the powerful get what's coming to them, please, do me a favor. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and most importantly, hit subscribe and ring that bell. We have so many more stories to tell. Thanks for listening.